and for our acknowledgement and prayer. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of our beautiful lands and our surrounding waters, the Ramangeri and the Ngarrindjeri people. As a community, we recognise and we respect their cultural connection with these lands and waters.
Almighty God, we ask you to bless this council and allow it to be an agent of change to the people of this city and beyond. Direct and proper its deliberations to the honouring of your name and the welfare of the people whom it serves. Amen.
Amen.
We gratefully acknowledge the men and women of the Navy, Army and Air Force who made the supreme sacrifice in the preservation of Australia's freedom and democracy. We also proclaim our gratitude to those who return to us.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's council meeting. It's nice to be back in the chamber with everyone for a normal council meeting where we can all see each other. And hello to all of those in the gallery and also to those who are watching this via our live streaming. Really, the only thing I'd like to highlight for you tonight for those community members that are watching is you may be aware that our draft 2020-2021 annual business plan and budget are out for community consultation, and I really would recommend that you have a look at it and contact one of your elected members or myself to go through it with you to answer any questions that you have, and please fill in a feedback form. The same goes with our draft community plan. There will be a Zoom meeting on the 2nd of July at 5:30. So if you want to take part in that and hear from administration in relation to the draft community plan and the draft annual business plan and budget, please register on the council website and participate in that Zoom meeting. And once again, your feedback will be taken into consideration in relation to these plans. Your council really wants this to be a budget and a community plan that you have input into, so I'd really encourage you to do that. We don't have any apologies, everybody's here tonight. And if we go to item 4, items adjourned or lying on the table, we have an adjourned item regarding the Encounter Bikeway realignment from Hindmarsh Road to investigate a car park. And the first recommendation there is that Council receive and note the adjourned item. If someone would like to move that way, Councillor Schofield, thank you very much, and Councillor Charles seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that receiving and noting the item? Councillor Charles? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? If not, I'll put that motion to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. The second recommendation that we have in front of us is that Council consider an allocation of $60,000 in the draft 2020-21 operating budget for further investigation into the options for the alignment of the Encounter Bikeway from the causeway to the council boundary with Alexandrina. Would someone like to move? Thank you, Councillor Littley, and seconded Councillor Henderson. Would either of you like to speak to that? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Charles.
Thank you. There certainly has to be some consideration about the Encounter Bikeway from the bluff through to our boundary, which is around about 3rd Avenue, on Seagull Avenue, crossing Seagull Avenue. Although we won't be going all the way, we're planning to take something to the investigator car park. I noticed the report that's been done here by, if you want to help me out with the name of the person who did the report, the company, you can, you're welcome to.
Brian Diamond.
Brian Diamond, is it Brian Diamond? But there was an on-site meeting with somebody, wasn't there? And the on-site meeting investigated options 1, 2, 2A, 3 and 3A, I think. And we refer to it as the Encounter Bikeway, but really it is also a walking trail. That's the principle of the idea of it, and we're told that if we do what we've got to do here, or what the original option was to build the most preferred one at one time was to put the thing through the sandhills and down through the groins and cross the train line 2 more times, which is dangerous in itself than what it already does. And we would then somehow end up with the best bike walkway in Australia. I think I saw on Channel 7 the other morning, one of the best bikeways ever in New South Wales. We'd have to be going to beat that. But I can't work out why, and this is why we prepared and did what we did, Councillor Kemp and myself, and we promoted using the existing one. I don't know how you're ever going to move people from walking along Hayward Court, Hayward Street, Oliver's Parade, Part 1 and Part 2, because that's just the most convenient A to B location of the lot. And at the present moment, it serves as a bike trail as well. And those are very, very quiet, docile streets. But let's assume that we actually do this. We build this thing. I don't know why we're looking at all these options. That's my point. If we do build it and we get it to 3rd Avenue, it will still continue down Seagull Avenue, Ocean Road, Barbara Street, Murray Street, Strangways Terrace, Basham Parade, Surface Parade, Ocean Parade, Middle Terrace, Padman Terrace, Esplanade, Surface Parade, Newell Avenue, Redcliffe Road, Knightley Road or Kitely Road, Underwood Avenue, Neighbour Avenue, across Beach Road, down Bristow Smith, and it finally makes its way to Barrage Road by the river. So what are we proving by trying to divert our bikeway down to a different area? When in actual fact, by keeping it up on Hayward Court, Hayward Street, Oliver's Parade, Part 1 and 2, we improve the infrastructure up there for those residents who live there on their most popular walking trail and riding path. You only have to go there at any time of day, but particularly, you know, in the morning or on weekends to see so many people using it and enjoying it. To encourage them to go down some stairs or even an incline to use the path would be almost impossible. And I think it's a very scary option for people to be down in such an isolated spot. Children, women on their own, or with the things that are happening these days, assaults and so on, I cannot see why we'd move it into an environmental area for a start, and at the risk of public safety and having to put in lighting, solar lighting as well. So I've spoken to that, but you know, I guess we've always got to spend some money to prove something. I'd like some councillor who is not in favour of running this bike trail and improving it where it already is to give me one good reason why we shouldn't keep it where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Councillor Robinson, you had your hand up as well, if you want to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I have a question. On this option here, it says that we're going to ask the consultant to options of the alignment from the causeway to the council boundary with Alexandrina. Firstly, I assume that in the interest of extracting best value out of this consultancy, that from the causeway, short piece anyway, will be part of the design of the redevelopment of that area when the causeway arrives on it. I presume there is no intention to realign the bikeway from the present Fisher playground through to the yacht club. And then we have another set of options already we've spent money on for the Bridge Terrace. So I'm wondering here, what is the purpose of us looking at the bikeway from the causeway to the council boundary with Alexandrina?
Thank you. That's a good question. And I'll put that to Brian Doman, who may be able to answer that for you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I think the intention is to ensure that whatever we do, that Council is giving direction for that whole section. I think in the discussions on Bridge Terrace, there were a number of discussions about, or maybe we should bring it back away from the front of the yacht club, and so the intention was to try and make sure that we're all on the same page, and then to start then looking at some designs so that we can, particularly for the whatever option we head towards, so that we can make some informed decisions.
Thank you, Brian. Victoria, would you like to speak to this?
Just to add to that, Councillor Robertson, just in regards to your question, yes, Council has endorsed option, I think it was option 2 of the design for Bridge Terrace, and Council resolved to consider $40,000 in its annual business plan and budget for detailed design of that portion. However, there was also discussions around looking more holistically at the whole bike path, walk path, to make sure that whatever you were doing it on a full picture of what was intended, rather than in a piecemeal approach, which had been occurring. You're already making some amendments, the widening, there's some provision for widening of certain parts of the path. And so the reason for this was to look at it from one end to the other and make sure that the council had looked at the whole bike path and made sure it was in the right positions, not only in Bridge Terrace, but all along Hayward Court, and the provision of this option that Councillor Charles has referred to, of positioning it in the right place, but it was giving you that holistic design rather than doing it in a piecemeal approach, which has been occurring in the past. But yes, it wasn't looking at removing it from existing path, but again, if Council was to consider some other options along the foreshore, between the causeway and Bridge Terrace, you may need to take that into consideration too.
If I ask a supplementary question, then it's I get it, and I appreciate the holistic approach, but in the terms of reference for the consultant, can we sort of not dilute the impact we have with the amount of money we've given, the huge cost of these consultancy fees and what we get out of them, that the bulk of the effort beyond the if there's anything the consultant sees that's really worthwhile addressing in the section of from the causeway to the yacht club, well and good, let's do it. But if we can direct them to the area north of the Hindmarsh River, I think we have got to get some bang for our buck. And there's a lot, and that section, as you can see from the millions of dollars that every option we have in front of us is for the bikeway is expected to cost, that there's a great deal of design work needed to be done.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Little, you wanted to say something, and then Councillor Glazebrook. Oh, I beg your pardon, you will be, sorry. Councillor Glazebrook.
Well, I generally agree with what Councillor Charles and I think what Councillor Andrews is saying as well. Could we remove some of these options? I can't see a point in spending money on options that we know we won't continue with, such as option 2, which is very expensive, $4.5 million. I think most people are in favour of option 1, which is in front of the properties there in Hayward Court. And yes, there are some areas that we need to consider up further, because there's more opportunities to follow the coastline further towards Port Elliot as well, which would need to be explored. So I just wonder whether we should narrow the scope a little bit, is what I'm trying to say, rather than have all of these options on the table when we know that we probably won't consider many of them.
I might ask the CEO to respond to that, Councillor Glazebrook.
Through the Mayor, in response to that question, the recommendation is seeking obviously that allocation of funds so that we can engage someone to undertake that work, developing that scope in terms of the options you want to explore. Happy, I believe that requires a workshop sitting down with members to refine that scope so you're clear about what we're going out for with that money. So that will come definitely.
Thank you.
Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I have a question initially, and my question is in relation to this. Has any gauging of temperature been made of Alexandrina's council's inclinations or opinions towards upgrading their side of the bike path? Because I think, yeah, if we're going to spend millions of dollars on upgrading our side, it's not good having a bike path to nowhere. So have those conversations been started at least?
Director Doman, oh, Brian Doman, sorry. Acting.
Through the Mayor. Not for some time. We had discussions probably 18 months ago with Alexandrina Council, but we haven't progressed that since that time. At the time, it was more about Kyneton Rocks area and how that would align through there if we changed the alignment. But that's something that we should be having those discussions with Alexandrina as we move forward. And I think, you know, once we develop up that scope with the workshops, I think that would be a sensible approach.
Sorry, just to follow up on that one. Were the initial discussions you had, did it seem like they were open to the opportunity of changing alignments or upgrades? Or were the discussions very kind of like, that's nice?
Through the Mayor again, yes, they were quite keen on that option. It was at the time they were looking at the development of the Kyneton Rocks Surf Lifesaving Club and looking at how it could go through that area. Beyond that area, I don't know what they've looked at, but certainly could be part of the discussions.
You have a question, Councillor Charles?
Yeah, I do. I've read through this, as you would imagine, fairly thoroughly, but I may have missed something. Option 1, did the consultant, he didn't write anything up anyway as far as using the roads, the existing roads, Hayward and so on. This figure here of 2,740,000, which is not the cheapest figure at all, but does that include doing anything with those roads? Or are we just coming up behind 74 Highmarsh Road where it's shown and where it stops in Hayward Court? Because all the rest go through to the investigator car park. Sorry, I'll stop talking so you can answer. Through the Mayor, of course.
Brian?
Yeah, through the Mayor. The cost, what we were looking at was that section up to Hayward Street. So we weren't looking beyond, so the costs are all consistent, but just in that envelope up to Hayward Street. So there was no costs looked at for either of the options beyond that point.
So our on-site meeting and walk was a bit of a waste of time because we were trying to encourage you to present that section of the bike trail. Is that right?
Through the Mayor again. So no, certainly the intention is for Council to make a decision which alignment you want, and then from then on, it was about comparing apples to apples.
So then you're telling us that just to go behind those houses into Hayward Court is 2 million, whatever it is, and no further. How can that be?
I'm not an engineer, but that was the figures that were given to us by the engineer.
Thank you. Is there, Councillor Mann, you've got a question, and then Councillor Kemp. Oh, sorry, you want to debate, then Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I take on board the comments that have been said. I think, I guess my view on this one is that that holistic idea of what the bike strategy was going for, and the phrase that we've used the entire time is that best bike path in the world or Australia, and I think the cost that we're looking at in the range of 2 to 4.5 million for those upgrades, and what the extent of that length is, and whether it's maybe the best 200-metre sky bike path, which is about 20 seconds on a bike, for that cost, and whether that is proportionate, especially looking holistically at everything else we're trying to do and all the other projects we're coming up. So I do have a few concerns, especially about the costs, and whilst there is a benefit to it, yeah, I am concerned about whether those costs justify it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I think this is a great initiative to allocate this money into our next year's budget, including the 40,000 already allocated. It gives us $100,000 to do a great plan. Well, I'd love to see it from the Bluff, but it's from the Causeway, so that's...
Sorry, can I just interrupt you for a moment, Councillor Kemp? I'm not sure that it's including the 40,000. Can I just get a clarification of that from Kelly Knight Stacey? Just because I don't want you to think that we're doing the wrong thing.
Thank you, through the Mayor. At the moment, there is, we've built in $60,000 in the draft capital budget for this investigation and design to occur. So I would have to refer to Brian if that is different, but that is what is in the current version that's out for public consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Jenkins and Kelly, for clarification. So either way, we have some funds being allocated. The thing is that it would have been, I think, premature to have this report done if we go have a workshop and look at other options, because when we did the walkthrough at the site on Hayward Court, it was intentional that option 1 would go all the way along after lot 51, would come onto council land, which is between the house and the embankments, taking a couple of roadways on the way as well. So that I was thinking would be the option 1, but that's still open for discussion in a workshop to go forward in a planning process. And I agree with Councillor Glazebrook in the sense that we should just go down to 1 or 2 options, at least 2 options to have a choice. And the other, I guess the third option is not do anything because of the cost factors to ratio of the benefits. But I think it's a great initiative. I'll support this because I think it's we need to get the plan right. We need to pick the best option. And I think we have a workshop in the future to clarify and exactly get it on paper what we really want. Then we can come back with a proper engineering, proper designs and proper costings.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to this? You've got a question? All right, I'll give you that.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. And thank you for the answers to my questions, Acting Director Doman. I guess my view of this, and Councillor Charles actually outlaid it perfectly in terms of the number of streets the bike path follows both within our council, but as soon as it crosses that council boundary into Alexandrina, it's on road after road after road. It's not an unusual thing for this path, and it's how it was designed originally. So I think looking at this, the original option of putting it down into the dunes, I absolutely agree with almost, I'd say, everyone in the chamber in terms of that being a bad idea. But I also think that, and it'll come as no surprise to any of you, that option 1 is also a bad idea, given especially the fact of that preliminary cost estimate, putting it at almost, what, $2.75 million for about 200 to 300 metres of pathway. Yeah. Option 0, which is upgrading the path that already exists in that same area, comes in at $220,000. And if you had another, what, $2.5 million, you could actually do minor improvements all along the rest of those roadways in our council area and make it a safer path the way along, like Councillor Charles was outlining, although possibly from a different angle. I think it's option 0. It's not the millions that Councillor Robertson said. Every option is millions. No. Options 1, 2 and 3 are definitely $2.5 to $4.5 million. But option 0 is about taking our existing assets, upgrading them, making them better used, but not spending $3 million on something that is a 20-second bike trip, realistically. As Councillor Mann outlined, we're not going to achieve the best bike path in the world. With the resources of a council of our size, we're not going to get there. And so it's looking about what resources we have and using them well to invest in our community. As Councillor Charles said, those residents up there, I'm sure that all the residents along the rest of the roads through Hayborough would love those minor upgrades, making it easier for them to navigate around the bike and pedestrian traffic as well. So I think bang for buck, $3 million can do a lot of good, but I'm not sure that pursuing options 1, 2, 3 is the good that we should be chasing at this point. So that, as well as the issues around what does it do after it hits the Alexandrina boundary, means that I can't vote for this as it is at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. And before I ask Councillor Littley to wind up this debate, I'll just draw your attention to a change in that recommendation. It's the draft capital budget, not the draft operating budget. So Karina has changed that on the screen. If you could just change that in your own agendas. If there's no further debate, have you got a question, Councillor
Just one more question. If we vote for this, we will, before anything gets implemented, we will be able to have a workshop, possibly with 1 or 2 of the consultants that have been used, so we can fine tune it, because I've already spoken and others have too, that we can't make any, and I'd love to adjourn this again, but I know I can't do it.
To answer your question through the Mayor, this is actually putting a provision in your budget. Doesn't mean you have to spend it now. So the resolution at the moment is actually putting it into your draft budget, which is currently out for consultation. So you haven't adopted your budget to start with. I would love to be able to have a workshop before the adoption of the budget so that you could fine tune your decision. But even if it's included in the budget, when we do hold that workshop, you may choose to move ahead with it or not. It's a budget allocation. It's not committed you to anything at this stage, but at least is providing a provision in your budget to move forward if you choose to do so.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Much better.
Thank you. Councillor Littley, would you like to close the debate?
I agree that there needs to be some consideration to the bikeway, and that's why I moved the motion. I find it peculiar that Councillor Charles suggests that the sand dune pathway, that alignment, is the most preferred, because that's certainly not what I've witnessed right now and right throughout this conversation. Far from it. I'm not surprised that the cost for the elevated pathway is 2.4 million or whatever it is. I think that's probably cheap for that pathway. Just going on experience of engineering pieces of work. And I share the value consideration that Councillor Mann and Councillor Hales, and I think we all have, in the fact that we need to get bang for our buck, and we need to have a valuable asset and not overspend. And that's why I think it's good that we are going to go into an environment where we will have some choices on the table, and we can discuss those choices, and we can look at the options from $220,000 upgrades, which gives us a usable asset that might be more in keeping with what we need as a community, right through to the U-Butte. Let's see if we go for it. That's the process we're in, is as has just been explained by the CEO, is that we're putting money aside, an allocation, to have a choice whether we chase this up or not. So we can go ahead. So I'm certainly going to be voting for it, and I encourage everyone to vote for it. So so we can have that investigation. It would be money well spent, and more so would probably lead to money not wasted.
Might just do a point
Thank
of order
you.
on that, and
What
you
is
want
your
to know
point?
what it is. Just to clarify to Councillor Littley that I am not in favour of the Sandhill option. I spoke against that,
Okay.
not the other way around.
Thank you. That's not a point of order, Councillor Charles, but it is a clarification, and thank you for that. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now turn to item 5, which is minutes of the previous meeting, and the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council held the 25th of May be confirmed as true and correct. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Littley, and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Either of you want to speak to that? Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. (5.2) The minutes of the special meeting of Council of the 11th of June, and the recommendation is that the minutes be confirmed as true and accurate. Councillor Littley and Councillor Robinson. Either of you want to speak to that? Anyone want to speak to that? Not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. Item 6, declaration of members' interests. This item is to remind council members of their requirements under section 73, 74, 75, 75A and 75B of the Local Government Act. You don't have to declare your interests here, but when members have an actual perceived or material conflict of interest, you must declare that interest and provide full and accurate details of the relevant interest at the time the matter comes up for consideration. So this item is just to remind you in relation to that. We have one, item 7, we have one request for a deputation from Mr. Blatchford. Mr. Blatchford, thank you for your email requesting to make a deputation. However, I'm refusing your request as the matters you wish to address relate to Crozier Hill development, and on the 11th of March you were advised that we weren't going to be answering any more questions about that because of subject matter already answered. And I do ask that you cease from sending any further correspondence to Council on the matter. If you believe you have the right to do so, you should direct any further allegations or complaints to the relevant authorities, who no doubt will decide for themselves whether or not they will investigate. As required, I refuse your request and I report my decision to the Council meeting. So thank you very much. Then we have questions from the gallery. Again, questions from Mr. Blatchford. Your question again is in relation to the Crozier Hill estate matter, which I have disallowed, and I have disallowed that in the past, and you have been advised of that in writing. If you are dissatisfied with the Council's response, you are able to contact the South Australian Ombudsman, whose role it is to investigate complaints about councils and state government authorities. Details on how to make a complaint can be found on the Ombudsman's website. If you have a complaint about an individual member of council, staff or elected member, you can put in a complaint under the relevant code of conduct for councils or council employees. If you have evidence of corruption or maladministration on the part of council or staff, you should contact the Office for Public Integrity, who manage complaints of that nature. So please don't send us any more questions in relation to the Crozier Hill matter, which has already been dealt with. Thank you. You have, yes, I have emailed you a copy of both of those. Sorry, I've sent you a copy of thank you. That is all, Mr. Blatchford. There are no petitions, and we now move to item 10, Office of the Chief Executive Officer, and it's the outstanding resolutions for June 2020. The recommendation is that Council receive and note the outstanding resolution June 2020 report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you, and Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I want to highlight a number of these resolutions with questions and comments, and I start with the on the first page 24, the second one from the top, which is that the Main Street program phase 2, which is said to be complete, and expressions of interest were received for this program in April 2020. But my question of this to the CEO is, are we going to get, as a council, any report on the expression of interest process and the outcomes to it? This is a particularly important subject for the recovery of our economy, which will be, in the first instance, probably largely based on wide-scale uptake and adoption of online business practices, and also be a major attraction to new businesses coming to Victor. So to me, in a sense, the investigation is complete, but we don't know anything about what the outcome of it was. I think that it's complete when you get a report on it.
I'll ask the CEO about that. Graham Pathouse.
Yeah, thanks through the Mayor. Yes, the investigations in terms of the expression of interest has been completed. So the collation is still occurring with that, and the intent is that that'll come to Council still, and also in relation to that, there will also be some work that helps to then identify appropriate project development opportunities that might come out of that, and then also inform budget bids in the future. But the short answer is that yes, there's still work to come to Council in relation to that.
Okay. The second comment is on the next item, which is the December of last year motion on notice for the climate emergency declaration. Now, I voted for this climate emergency declaration, not because I necessarily believe that it's what it's supposed to be, but I thought that, well, what I'll do is vote for this thing because we'll see how much actual practical application is going to come out of this stuff. And so it's down here in the resolutions as being complete. In other words, the Council acknowledges that we face a climate emergency, and this has been incorporated into the following documents. There's a list of documents down there, but the ones that particularly interest me is the 2021 annual business plan and budget, which, as the Mayor pointed out at the beginning of this meeting, is now out for public consultation. And secondly, and more importantly, the draft community plan, which is also out for community consultation. I've been through both those documents probably half a dozen times in the last 2 or 3 weeks for various reasons. But I went through these two documents. That's the ones we've sent out for community consultation. I thought, well, let's go and see what practically there is in there. If we're declaring a climate emergency, like if we don't do something now, all the kids will be dead in 10 years or something similar, or we'll enter into an irreversible cycle of decline or whatever, is it, what are we actually doing? And in both those documents, it hardly gets a mention. In fact, I'm not sure that that the climate emergency gets a mention anywhere in the 10-year plan. That's the one about 10 years into the future. The annual business plan for 2021 is just about the next 12 months. But the 10-year plan doesn't mention any of this stuff. There's nothing in there about climate change and the climate emergency. In there, we're supposed to be ensuring that Victor Harbour is climate ready and heat prepared, including improving water resilience and protection of coastal and agricultural communities. Very little in either the work plan for next year or the 10-year plan. Very, very little indeed. And, you know, would seek to prioritise in the short to medium term, acknowledges that more action is required at all levels of government. You know, if this is said to be complete, then what it means is that all the huff and puff that there was about this climate emergency declaration come to nothing, because in both those key documents, which are now under active consideration, there's nothing there. It's vacuous. So to me, I don't see why this is complete. But if you accept that it is complete, then be my guest. But don't talk anymore about climate emergencies because you're not serious. But I challenge you, go into the community plan, go into the 2021 annual business plan and budget, and find out where you've got anywhere in the document, whether it be in the guiding text up the front or whether it be in individual projects, that really reflects actions to be taken in the face of an emergency. So to me, this is not complete, but if the chamber decides it is complete, well and good, but I don't want to be involved anymore. And what's more, at the next council meeting, I'll be moving a rescission motion to say that we take it back. We're no longer in a climate emergency because we don't think, we're not taking action on any of it, and it's not a climate emergency anymore. It just passed, or COVID's become a bigger emergency or whatever. So that to me is...
I might ask the CEO to respond to that, Councillor Robertson.
Through the Mayor, just in a general answer to your response, while I think most of your debate just now or your statements have been directed more to the chamber in regards to your decision to declare a climate emergency, if you actually look at the resolution of the council and why it's marked as complete, is this is an ongoing action and it will be sitting on the outstanding resolutions forever and a day because it's something we need to continue to do over a long period of time. While it's stated it's complete is because it needs to be incorporated into our annual business plan, our community plan, our environmental management plan, all the key documents that council references and the work that it does and its actions. So my understanding of the recommendation, while it is very, very broad, there are some key things that needed to be done and actioned, like writing to the members of parliament, both state and federal, but others is around a commitment to reaffirm both the council's commitment to the mitigation of climate initiatives or to mitigate against climate change, but it's an ongoing action. It's not one that it could sit in here forever. But this was saying it's completed in that it needs to be referenced in all of those documents and it's an ongoing process that council needs to continue to refer to. But I think most of your debate was directed at the chamber rather than administration.
If I might ask Mayor a question to the CEO, a lot of what goes into those two documents, they're drafted up initially by the staff. Now, it's true that this chamber itself, the elected members, voted for this climate emergency. But I would imagine that the staff following on from that would pick up and say, yeah, okay, so the chamber's declared a climate emergency. We're going to start paying some attention to this stuff. It is an emergency we declared. It's not just sort of say a heads up on something that might be happening. And so the material is coming forward in the preamble in all those, in those two documents, the annual business plan, as well as the 10-year community plan, nothing. So, I mean, how can it be that it's the staff doesn't agree with the council on this or what?
No, well, both of those documents have been workshopped and presented to members on more than one occasion and also been endorsed for consultation. And yes, the word, we've declared a climate emergency is not clearly referenced on one page and has its own section. Council's roles and responsibilities to mitigate against those provisions are very well detailed within those documents. And you may not agree that it's articulated clearly within that, but the chamber obviously does because the chamber is endorsed to present them for consultation. The community may come back during that consultation to say there is not enough reference to emergency, climate change emergency that was declared by council. And we need to take that in consideration. So I think both parties, both administration and the council, have fed into those documents and that's what we currently have, which is out for consultation.
Kelly, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just in regards to the Community Plan 2030 that's out for consultation at the moment, there is a specific aspiration within that, aspiration 4, around protecting our environment. which does mention climate change, as well as a number of strategies and priorities for the adapting to the impacts of climate change, which is the first strategy at the top of that aspiration. And there's a number of priorities that we have, as well as some measurements included in that. And then our 2021 annual business plan and budget would also have some actions that help support those priorities and strategies as well. So there is reference within that community plan in regards to climate change, as well as some contextual information under the strategic context. So yeah, there is mention of specifically for climate change within that document.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm aware of some of the things that the council has already undertaken in relation to helping us around climate issues, the LED lighting being one, and discussions in the chamber about watering of lawns and parks, and whether or not we wanted to continue watering at the current rate or decrease our watering in order to save water. So it's certainly been an ongoing discussion in the chamber amongst the members. And as the CEO said, if the members of the community think that we need to highlight that more, then there's an opportunity for them to let us know through the feedback for the budget and the 10-year plan. Councillor Charles, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, not only that, I guess we get an opportunity to have another crack at it ourselves after the public have looked at it. It's not been something that's been high on my list of hot topics.
Yep.
But there are some councillors here who do, well, the ones who initiated it in the first place, who could be watching it perhaps a little bit more carefully. So anyway, the good news is we can still do something with it.
Correct. Does anybody else, have you finished, Councillor Robertson?
No, Mayor, I haven't. I turn to page 27, the bottom item, which is a notice of motion, which dates back from March last year. This is about the council seeking membership of the city's power partnership, and that we were supposed within 6 months to identify 5 items included in the city's power partnership pledge that the Victor Harbour would strive to achieve. We're still waiting for those items to be finalised with intent to refer the matter to the Renewable Energy Advisory Group. There's a note in there about the issue being handballed to the Renewable Energy Advisory Group, but I'm just wondering whether we have confirmed with the whatever it is, the Climate Power Partnership, that that we are willing to be buddied up with other councils for knowledge sharing, and in general, what is our what is our status on this? Are we serious about this or not?
Thanks. Through the Mayor, the initial parts of that in terms of the letter and those things that you've just referenced, Councillor Robertson, were dealt with some time ago. What's still outstanding is progressing it through the Energy Advisory Group. So that did commence in March, but since March, it's just been delayed as a result of other circumstances that have occurred that have taken the attention of this particular department to be able to proceed that. But it is on our radar to continue with. So, and we're anticipating that it will come up to CASPAC in the very near future.
Anything further, Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, on bottom of page 30. I'm interested in this. We've had the economic impact assessment from Strickland on the construction of a multi-purpose landing facility in Victor Harbour. My understanding was that this was to be the business case, but I'm just seeking clarification as to, because it says here the cost estimates are currently being explored for the provision of the 2021 annual business plan and budget to finalise the full business case. My understanding was that the full business case had been done. So my question was going to be whether in fact we have made application with that full business case if that's appropriate, to the, I think it's the Building Better Regions Fund.
Through the Mayor. So the resolution that was actually moved by Council, which is in this report, it actually says that provision be made to actually complete the business case. You didn't complete the business case, you did a cost benefit analysis, and that's what we provided $5,000 for, which we capitalised on, and we're able to generate that to be over $30,000 to do that cost benefit analysis, with Building Better Regions funding $20,000. At the moment, we want to finalise that business case because at the moment you only have a cost benefit analysis and some original concept plans that were done back in 2014. There are still other elements that need to be done to finalise that. And this was stating we were going to put some costs together about what would need to be provided in the 2021 budget. We have been progressing it, but there's no way to apply for any infrastructure grant funding because we do not have a detailed design or a specific location. While locations were discussed in that cost benefit analysis of the Eastern Beach, that still needs to be finalised. So that's what we were wanting to do, is to bring all those documents together so you've actually got a business case about what this council would like to pursue, whether with state or federal government or private sector investment.
If I might ask another question on that, or at least express a concern that I think, it's a personal opinion, but that the grant funding is going to become increasingly difficult to find, especially, you know, in terms of six-figure sums or more. And this business of whether or not we're going to be able to complete these tasks, so we can make an application for grant in this coming financial year. I hope we can, because I get a feeling we might be missing the boat on this.
Any further questions, Councillor Robertson?
No, Mayor, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have, Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just go back to that item about the Powers Partnership. I just want to get clarification from the CEO about the comment under the follow-up actions. It says reports presented to CASPAC or Council wherever meets sooner. I just hope that we're not falling into the trap of if CASPAC doesn't meet, let's put it into the chamber and we have a busy agenda as we do without having discussions on items which should be at CASPAC. So I just hope that statement is not leading into us doing that. And just a clarification, it's just maybe an err on the side. I mean, that type of statement to me worries me, that, you know, CASPAC doesn't meet and we will just put it into the chamber.
If I can answer your question through the Mayor, CASPAC at the moment, the way it's currently set up, meets every second month, and it has a workshop the month in between, while Council meets every month. When that CASPAC was originally set up, that was seen as a good option, but obviously what we're finding, and probably not the best time during COVID because we weren't able to meet, we were bringing things to the chamber. There is a CASPAC meeting scheduled for the 7th of July, but the actual CASPAC meeting is not until August, so then it would still need to come to the chamber for a decision by the end of August. I'm trying to not have matters stretch out for months and months because they're going through a committee before they come to Council. So, long answer to your question is that it will possibly come to a CASPAC workshop and then a Council meeting if you're not wanting it to wait for a CASPAC meeting in between, but that CASPAC meeting only makes recommendations to the chamber. Graham Pathouse and I have also discussed about reviewing the terms of reference for CASPAC to try and make it align better with Council or work better for the chamber as what you're wanting it to achieve, and having opportunity to have a good, robust discussion about matters before they do get to the chamber. That's why I referenced either or, because I know it may not quite align with CASPAC. It will stretch it out a bit longer.
Any other comments, Councillor Charles? I've got your name down here, but you have spoken, haven't you? You had a question.
No, I answered my own question. I
Okay.
didn't actually.
Okay.
But nice to have my name down there. Am I on the good side or the bad side?
You're right underneath everyone else and in the middle of everyone else. Does anybody else want to speak? If not, I put that recommendation actually, Councillor Henderson, you seconded that. Sorry, Councillor Schofield, you moved it. Do you want to? No. If not, put that to the chamber. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to the 1920 loan report, which is item 10.2. This was discussed when we were talking about adopting the draft annual business plan and budget. The first recommendation is that Council receive and note the report. Councillor Littley, thank you very much, and Councillor Hales seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. The second item is that Council endorse the annexure of 2.8 million from the cash advance debenture, number 79, for a period of 3 years, commencing on the 15th of July to take advantage of the discounted interest rates being offered by the LGFA, and that the Mayor and Chief Executive be authorised to sign and seal the agreement. Councillor Littley moving that way and Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? No. Anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson and then Councillor Glazebrook.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I just wanted to say that a great piece of work by Kelly and her team. I enjoyed reading it. It was really well written. It's got a great story to tell on what would normally be a topic that's dry as chips. So I just wanted to say well done.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Councillor Glazebrook, you wanted to speak?
Just a question, really. Do I understand this correctly? This is going to be part of that $10 million venture, or is it going to be a new one? Sorry, oh, there you are over there. Crikey.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Yes, so we're asking them to basically annexure a portion of that $10 million CAD across to the discounted facility rather than take out an additional loan at the moment.
Does anybody else have any comments, discussion, questions? Councillor Littley, do you want to close the debate at all?
Yeah, I'd just like to say well done, Councillor Robertson, for acknowledging the great the work by the staff on this report. So well done.
Thank you. I'll put that to the floor now. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.3, review of the complaint handling procedure under the Council Members Code of Conduct. And I'm happy to do this en bloc if someone would like to move it en bloc. Councillor Littley, and seconded by Councillor Henderson again. Sorry? Sorry. Sorry, I didn't see any other hands. Would either of you want to speak to that? No. Does anybody want to speak to this? If not, I'll put to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We come to item 10.4, which is the 2020-2021 interim budget, annual business plan and strategic planning notice. Because we're not adopting the budget until August, we need to have an interim budget for some items that are going to begin in the beginning of the financial year. So hence these recommendations. The first one is that Council receive and note the interim budget, annual business plans and strategic planning notice. Number 4, 2020 report. Do I have someone to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Robertson, thank you. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. Second recommendation, that Council notes that in accordance with the provisions of the annual business plan and strategic planning notice number 4, 2020, the adoption of the 2020-2021 budget and annual business plan deadline has been extended to the 30th of November. However, it is anticipated that the ordinary deadline of 31st of August will be met. Someone want to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you, and Councillor Robertson, thank you. Either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The definitely I agree that we should be getting on, and it would be terrible if we didn't get this budget and business plan passed by the 31st of August. But I just have one question here. The ordinary deadline is for the CEO or to Kelly. Is this the ordinary deadline of the 31st of August, or is the ordinary deadline the 31st of July?
No, the ordinary deadline is 31st of August. We've always adopted our budget usually around the 2nd, 3rd of July, so we haven't required to have an interim budget because 1 or 2 days doesn't matter. There was provision made because of COVID that councils had up until the end of November to adopt their annual business plans and budgets, so they would be looking for an interim budget to carry them through to that stage. We are trying to work within the current legislation, which is the 31st of August, but it still requires us to have this interim budget in place.
Does anybody else want to speak to this item? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Number 3, the pending the adoption of the annual budget, Council adopts the expenditure of council funds on the work, services and operations of the council as identified in attachment A, operating, and attachment B, capital, to this report. Councillor Hales moving that way and Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. And I might do items 4 and 5 together if that's all right with you, because they flow on pretty well. And so that is that Council authorise the Chief Executive Officer to expend the council funds as contained in attachment A and B in accordance with the terms of approval as the Chief Executive Officer thinks fit. And the Chief Executive Officer may delegate to other council employees of the council to expend funds approved in attachment A and B in accordance with the terms of approval as the Chief Executive Officer thinks fit. Would someone like to move those 2 items? Councillor Littley, thank you, and Councillor Robertson seconding that. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson, sorry, as a seconder, do you want to speak to that? And then Councillor Kemp.
Yes, Mayor. A question to the CEO. Why is 4 and 5 been put in? I totally understand why 4 should be there, because I think that there'll be a lot of volatility in the needs for expenditure and rationalising of actions in the next during this winter period. But I'm wondering, what's the purpose of having part 5 in recommendation 5?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I can answer that. Look, really, we were using the LGA's template for that. Given the 4th recommendation there, the CEO has the ability to delegate to staff anyway, but it's just showing that basically we were using that template and we followed on through that whole process with that. But it is an additional recommendation that may not necessarily need to be there, but it also doesn't hurt.
Since this is the end of this, of looking at these last 2 recommendations, I'd just like to make a comment on that I think that, as I mentioned before, I think this is going to be a very uncertain time in terms of expenditure. But I would also like to think that, although in the background here, attachments A and B have been basically running a ruler across 25% of the 25% of expenditure and putting that in as an amount. I think that there will be some need to be looking more closely at some items on the expenditure there, and I hope we get a chance to be able to, excuse me, look into those. For instance, just one I had highlighted here, the public conveniences to be built at the Bluff boat ramp. Clearly, if we could get that job done before the Christmas break, that would be great. I'm not sure when it was programmed into the, but there will be some other activities, particularly on the operating budget, that I think that we might need to be have a chance to discuss with the CEO about.
Kelly?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just a couple of points on that, Councillor Robertson. In regards to the items listed on attachment B, which are the capital ones, we actually asked each of the officers that were in charge of those projects which ones needed to start as early as possible to meet the schedules and meet peak periods. So that was the list that was provided, so we could really get started on those, 1st of July. In terms of the attachment A, which is the operating, it was just essentially a quarter of the budget to allow us to keep going, and whatever council decides in terms of the draft budget that's out for consultation will overwrite anything that's in here anyway. So it's allowing enough money in there for us to continue on with current services, whilst knowing that you still have a lot of decision points around the budget still to come.
You, Councillor Kemp, you wanted to speak?
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. I'm not in favour as the two motions are written. I'd like to move an amendment, and my amendment is to delete as the Chief Executive Officer thinks fit. The reason why I want to move this amendment is two things. There's not a critique of the CEO's performance and her integrity or honesty. It's about sometimes perception to the community or to our community that, we've given approval for the Chief Executive Officer to actually, as she thinks fit, to spend the funds. We already given her the approval by endorsing the annual plan, and this is a supplement annual plan. That's her authority to spend the funds. She has powers under her role. If in the sense of emergencies and things like that, she can actually change the plans. But generally speaking, when we endorse an annual plan, we're giving the CEO authority to spend those funds and to follow the plan. If she wants to deviate from the plan, then because the elected members actually endorsed it and set the plan and approved the plan, any deviation from the plan should come back to council, because it may look at our strategic focus of what we want to try and achieve. So having a statement in there, to me, it's more of a risk of perception that, we're giving our chief officer to spend as she thinks fit. It gives a connotation of, oh, hang on. And if for argument's sake, hypothetically, if the chief officer goes and does something as she thinks fit, we have no comeback because we gave approval to do that. I'm not saying she would. I don't believe she would ever do that. But again, the wording to me is not, I believe, is good in this type of context. She has the approval anyway, so we don't need to give it to her that way. Thank you.
So you're looking to move an amendment, Councillor Kemp?
Yes, I move the amendment to delete those words as the chief officer thinks fit.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Charles? Put the amendment to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? It's lost. We go back to the original motion. Any further discussion on the original motion? Councillor Littley, do you want to close debate?
Just going back to Kelly's commentary there, answering some questions. It is apparent to me, and I think it should be apparent to the rest of the chamber, that staff do have a plan to deliver despite the unsettled times and the environment that we may be entering into, or we are entering into. So once again, I see good concise planning coming from our staff and the administration. So I'd like to see this go through as it is.
Thank you. I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you.
Division, please.
All those in favour? Councillor Kemp called a division. I'll just wait for Karina to give me the nod. For Councillor Henderson. Councillor Littley, Councillor Glazebrook, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Schofield, Councillor Mann, Councillor Hales, thank you very much. And against, Councillor Kemp and Councillor Charles. That motion is carried. We now move to item 10.5. Review of the Code of Practice for Meeting Procedures, Code of Practice for Access to Meetings and Documents, Informal Gathering Policy and Public Consultation Policy. The first recommendation is that Council receive and note the review. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Hales, thank you, and Councillor Littley seconding that. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, thank you. The second recommendation is that Council endorses the amendments to the Code of Practice for Meeting Procedures, Code of Practice for Access to Meetings and Documents, Informal Gathering Policy and Public Consultation Policy. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Littley, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Henderson. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Just a question, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I note in the agenda papers it talks about the 27th of June 2020, subject to no further extension of the major emergency declaration. Victoria's going through a second wave. If we have a second wave, we have to reintroduce all this again?
My understanding, Councillor Kemp, is that if an emergency declaration is announced and we have to go back into electronic meetings, then a number of these meeting procedures will need to be changed back again.
So would it be prudent to, you know, at the moment to, you say in other words, if I understand you correctly, the only way we can have face-to-face meetings by changing the procedures. Is that correct? Or should we wait?
No, through the Mayor, this the recommendation written in such a way that if the emergency response is extended, we would continue on with these procedures in place. At the moment, restrictions are being lifted, so we can have meetings in public as we are, or if the emergency was continued and restrictions were further imposed, we could convert back to having them via Zoom. So this is just giving us the option based on that emergency response. But at this stage, I don't know what's happening with Victoria's restrictions, but we are still haven't heard anything different that the emergency response here will be looking to be lifted. And I think we should have notification of that by Friday.
Any further questions or comments, Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question to the CEO. Do the removal of the provisions that are in there now prohibit us from having, say, an informal briefing over Zoom for those other smaller meetings where it's just receiving information?
I'm looking to Kyla up the back of the room. I don't think they are, because the provisions are still in place. So we could still choose to have a meeting via Zoom. And if it was open to the public, live stream. If it was not, close it. So,
any further questions or comments? Councillor Littley, do you want to close the debate? Put it to the floor then. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 11, Community and Development, the Victor Harbour Agribusiness Survey, the key findings report, and the recommendation is that Council receive and note the key findings of the Agribusiness Survey report. Councillor Schofield, thank you very much for moving that way, and seconding that, Councillor Kemp, thank you very much. Do either of you want to speak to it? Councillor Schofield.
Yes, I'd just like to say it's a really good report and gives us a really a definite idea of exactly what our agricultural businesses across our region are providing to our community. So well done on the report.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. There any further discussion in relation to that? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.2, the 2020 Victor Harbour Rock and Roll Festival. And I will do that recommendation en bloc if people are happy with that. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And is seconded by Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that? No, does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Glazebrook.
Just a comment that it's such a shame that this is not going to be going ahead, and that I really like the idea that come from the administration about potentially encouraging some of the local hotels and food vendors and people to perhaps try and get a rock and roll band down for the weekend, and just so that we can keep the momentum going a little bit, because it'd be a shame to lose it. It's been a very successful event, so I'd be very much in favour of that idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glazebrook. Councillor Charles.
Yes, I noticed in the event alternatives paragraph there. No, I guess this all depends on just how the COVID-19 thing pans out. It still keeps moving through positively. That it's a great opportunity to christen a new facility there, which will be the amphitheatre and the Soldiers Memorial Gardens. And it will provide excellent publicity for it too if it's handled well. So I think we can still make some positive moves with not necessarily all of the $27,000, but there's got to be ways of doing it and providing a roadmap anyway for future things there at that particular thing there, the particular amphitheatre. Schools and so on and so forth might be able to put on events, but we can only hope that that'll be the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. There's no further, Councillor Littley.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that there's a number of small alternative type events being offered up here. It's quite evident in South Australia that there's a push to get, because we are largely COVID, well, we are COVID free and look like we should be able to maintain that, but to get people out and about exploring their own state, and anything we can do to capture some of that market. And I think around town we're seeing that already. The idea of a day trip to Victor Harbour has become quite a bit more appealing than it has been for a number of decades. So, or Port Elliot, if you just drive past the Port Elliot Bakery on any given day. So any support that we as a council can give to individual operators trying to push these events out, and it can just be that in-kind support of a pat on the back and encouragement. That should be done at all efforts should be looked to. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. If there's no further debate, there is Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, I think it's a great initiative. I think it's very innovative for Stacey to not just look at the fact that we go to Councillor, but we're looking at alternative solutions. And I think that's good in that context that, you know, we are still going ahead and still looking at economic development and supporting our local businesses who certainly do need it. So this type of activities over 3 months periods, and I guess it's really looking forward to exactly what they're going to deliver. It'll be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And I, would concur with all of the comments that have been made. And I think that I'm hopeful that the Rock and Roll Festival is going to be able to continue on next year. But in the meantime, I think we'll be able to get some good things happening here. I'll put that to the floor if there's no further comments from anybody. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 11.3, the Native Fauna and Wildlife Conservation Group. The first recommendation is receiving and noting the report. If someone would like to move that way. Councillor Kemp, thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, thank you. Recommendation 2, that decision OC 7512 2019 made at the ordinary meeting held on the 28th of October 2019 to establish a Native Fauna Conservation Committee as a subcommittee of the City Inactivation and Strategic Planning Advisory Committee, and that it largely be comprised of community members be revoked. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. Councillor Hales, either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to revoking that committee? Councillor Kemp.
I'm not supporting this motion. I think that having a Native Fauna Conservation Committee, I think the reasons why it was set up for and the discussions to set it up, I know there's been debate and workshops around it, but I think this type of committee can certainly provide good support to staff to carry out various programs and initiatives, and also looking at other ways of supporting through doing other types of educational programs, as well as not only just sit on a committee but also be involved in doing various things as well. So I think reporting back to CASPAC on some of the strategic issues around the Native Fauna Conservation Group will be a little bit more different than a working group in my terms. So I like to maintain what we've voted on in the first place. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Along the same lines as Councillor Kemp, but from a slightly different perspective, I think that this was originally put up as an activity that would be providing practical support to the city activation and in particular part of the City Activation and Strategic Planning Committee. So if it's not to be part of that, so be it. But I think it'll still be able to work, but it won't be something that CASPAC considers as part of its brief. So that's all right.
I might just ask the CEO to respond, because I know that we've had quite a lot of discussion about this in a number of informal briefings.
Through the Mayor, I guess it's been well detailed in the report as a result of the various attempts at drafting the terms of reference for this committee. It was clearly identified in the chamber and also at the workshop that a committee of a formal nature looking at processes was not what Councillor Robertson you were initially intending. You were wanting a doing committee to be on the ground, out and about. Hence this report, hence the change in the tact as a result of that workshop. So my understanding that's what's articulated in this report was what you were looking for initially, but unfortunately it sort of transformed to where you didn't want it to be as being a committee structure. So the administration has tried to respond to what we heard at that workshop with members when you were looking at trying to draft those terms of reference, which I believe we had several attempts at doing.
If I might, CEO, yeah, I agree with what you say. It's just that when I read through what's in here, this group is to be, it doesn't really have a place in terms of what it's doing. I mean, it'll be a community group, so I mean, it'll report back to the community, but to what extent does the council feel that it wants to be part of what it's doing in terms of, you know, all those things I mentioned before, like the environment business and dealing with climate emergencies and stuff like that. So to me, it just doesn't have as it stands now, it doesn't report to anything. No, it doesn't have to. By the way.
No. Through the Mayor, it's intended that it would as a committee of council, CASPAC looks at those overarching strategies and policies like our dog and cat management plan, like our environmental management plan, and it's referenced on page 115 of the type of work that this group would do, and that would be enacting elements of those council documents. So there would be a significant amount of council support that would be required for that on the ground support that you were looking for in terms of education and actioning those policies and plans and seeing that it occurred. So that again was my understanding and the intent of the various discussions we've had. So it's not saying that this is separate to council, it is a group of the councils. We would seek council representation on it, as well as representation of both of those areas that manage those two plans, but formulating it to be an on-the-ground actioning group rather than a committee that sits around and makes recommendations to council.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Schofield, then Councillor Charles.
I guess it's a little bit of a question. With the new land care board, one of the things is working very closely with councils. So I'm wondering whether this is something that would actually link into that board, rather than be something that council control, but when we have input into the land care board, whether they're things that we actually ask to be considered, and this could be one of them. Just a thought.
Again, within the document, that is seen as one of the existing organisations, previously NRM, now Landscape Board, that this group would look to tap into. There tends to be elements of funding or support and programs that come out from those state government bodies, making sure that we get our fair share of distribution within our community. That would be the intent as well.
Charles?
Yeah, well, perhaps something will grow from this, even if it's not perfect to start with. I think probably it's more appealing to people to join an active conservation group as opposed to sitting in meetings. So it'll just have to depend on when there's expressions of interest, just how many people put their hand up, how many people will, or there'll be obviously some crossover from other groups. There's so many other groups here, Dot pointed, that would have an interest in this. So let's just see how it runs. You've got to kick it off somewhere or other, I think. So it's fine with me.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll put that to the floor. I'll put recommendation 2, that the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Councillor Robertson? Voted for it? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. The third recommendation is that Council initiate the establishment of a native fauna and wildlife conservation group, and that it largely be comprised of community members. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Hales, and seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
There doesn't have to be. We're just picking a number of a good sized group. So if you want to make that larger, smaller.
I'm sorry, I would think that it would be, unlimited. There wouldn't be a lower limit to the number of community members.
And it's not referenced that in the actual recommendation. So it has referenced it in the report. So the group structure is proposed to consist of, but the recommendation is that you're establishing that group. So there doesn't need to be a limit.
Yeah. Okay. I also like to think that on page 114 as well, that existing environmental groups and organisations, it's that I think we also would be looking to support for some from private sponsors as well. Locally, that would include probably Softfoot as a specialist outfit in conservation of endangered macropods. So, and also the aim of this group on page 112, it definitely is to significantly increase household knowledge of native fauna species management and conservation. And secondly, I would think a community commitment to managing feral and domestic predator populations. But thirdly, to see measured increases in the native fauna populations, especially those threatened or endangered. And that we recognise that significant and sustained improvement to the environment will be achieved through community action and citizen science. And also on page 115, I think that there's a lot to be done, but I think the issue of weed populations and litter control, I think is not an area that would be part of that group's activities.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak to recommendation 3? If not, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously, thank you. And that recommendation 4, that Council undertake an expression of interest for suitably qualified members of our community to serve on the Native Fauna and Wildlife Conservation Group. Moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Either of you like to speak to that? Anyone like to speak to that? Not, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We now move to item 11.4, Railway Terrace and Station Area Public Art Commissioning Plan. And I might do that recommendation en bloc. Councillor Robertson? Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to ask the advice of the CEO. Should I be, it would only be a perceived interest, conflict of interest. Do I need to, do I have a perceived conflict of interest in this particular issue?
Through the Mayor, while I do not give you advice in terms of this is about the commissioning of the public art for this particular project. So I would suggest that you would declare a perceived conflict of interest, but it's not relating specifically to that development. It's the process that will be undertaken for the acquisition of that piece of public art that is going to be placed within it. But it is purely your decision, your direction.
Yeah, I declare a perceived conflict of interest, but I would stay in the chamber and but not vote on this issue.
You need to specify why you would have a perceived conflict of interest. That would be part of your declaration.
It would be because my wife has a property in that precinct, and I'm not sure how this would actually be a perceived conflict of interest, but because she does own a property there, then I guess dressing up the area with public art would be of benefit to her, but I don't see how she can influence the processes that are about to be put in train, but I'll declare it.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. We'll provide you with a conflict of interest form. Would someone like to move the recommendation en bloc? Councillor Littley, thank you, and seconding it, Councillor Mann. Do either of you want to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Charles?
Could someone please, one of the directors or perhaps the community development director, just, it doesn't state it here, but the last selection of a public art, the top of the main street, for example, ended up being decided on by a committee of about 5 people. No doubt they weren't conflicted in any way, but they chose, and then it came to council for ratification. I'm hoping that this time around it'll go to public consultation and they can choose between 1, 2 or 3 different options or different artists' work rather than the council making the decision. We've grown used to what's in the main street now and most people completely ignore it, but I think we can do better by consulting with our community this time.
Through the Mayor, in answer to your question, this is the same process that same piece of art, which is Elemental, was acquisitioned, and that is as per the Arts SA public art acquisition process. It's the same process that was undertaken for the memorial on the Telstra building. So it is the process that Council has previously endorsed for the acquisition of public art, which is as per Arts SA public art acquisition processes.
Thank you. It still doesn't seem to me that it's right to handle it that way. I do think that people who, in this particular case, there's no near businesses essentially and neighbours who have to look upon it every day. But if something's in your precinct, I think you should be given an opportunity to at least cast a vote and make a decision rather than having it foisted on you.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, it's a question, Mayor. The timeframes on page 131 and 132 seem to be pretty optimistic. And in fact, I was coming back to the question that Councillor Charles raised, that about whether there would be...
Can I have a point of order, please? I'm a little bit confused.
Sorry? And what's your point of order, Councillor Littley?
Well, Councillor Robertson has declared a perceived conflict of interest and stated that he wouldn't take part in the vote. I'm just wondering whether being part of the debate is influencing the vote there.
Because it is a perceived conflict of interest, he can do what he wants to do if he declares it. He has said that he's not going to take part in the vote. He's asking questions about the timeline, so I think that he can ask questions, but I think it would be better to limit it as questions, if you can understand that, Councillor Robertson. But being perceived, my understanding is that he can do what he wants to do. If it was a material or actual, there's another way for him to go. I will check with the CEO just to make sure that I have got it right, because these are always a little bit tricky. If you just hold on for 1 minute. The CEO concurs with me. Councillor Robertson actually could participate in the debate and vote if he wanted to, because is a perceived. He has said that he won't vote. It is a fine line in terms of that taking part in the debate or asking a question. I think because he has got a question on the timeline, I will let that go. But I just think you need to be careful how far you go, Councillor Robertson, given that you said that you won't be voting on this and that there is a perceived conflict. But please carry on. I'll decline that conflict of interest at this point, Councillor Littley. Councillor Robertson, your question about the timeline? Is
the time frame for this action here too short now? In that are you able to distribute through a nationwide series of networks the proposal for assessment, and then stick to this schedule within 3 days, middle of July, which is a couple of weeks away, to shortlist the 3 artists.
Through the Mayor, yes, the timeframes are a bit tight, although in saying that, our Arts and Culture Officer has looked at it and is well familiar with how this process works, and is confident that it'll yield the results that Council needs in terms of keeping the project moving. We are working towards a project commencement date in September for the broader project, the entire capital delivery for the works on site. So there's probably a little bit of wriggle room in some of the time frames, but there's certainly the starting date is something that we need to aim for, so that as a contractor takes over the site, we'd have certainty as to what that space is going to look like and what's required. So yes, tight, but we believe achievable.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? Councillor Mann, you got a question?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, just a question to the CEO. I note the report says it'd be a national tender, subject to Arts SA, whether there's any regulations that they put on about who can be included. So I'm just wondering if it will be a national tender or whether it will be confined to South Australia.
I'm trying to think of my response. So your question is asking whether there'd be a restriction of going national. I was a bit...
Sorry, I could have worded that a lot better. So in the report, it says the artist brief is circulated nationally with the exception of any location limitations determined by funding partners, for example, Country Arts SA. So I guess my question is, if Country Arts SA are funding this, would they put a restriction on it that we cannot do a national tender?
They may, and that depends if we were wanting to match any funding. So if Country Arts were saying they would co-fund any piece, but it had to be from a local artist, then we would need to meet with those requirements.
The follow-up question then, could that be part of, if we do that national tender, and there's obviously with that guidelines about assessing the artworks, if they were interstate still being considered, but then that be a part of that consideration is the fact that interstate ones won't get that Country Arts SA. So still including them in the process, but if it comes down to picking between them, whether that extra funding gets a local artwork over the line, for example.
There's not necessarily extra funding associated with this coming from Arts SA. So I'd imagine if that was part of the conversation, then certainly that would be a restriction or a requirement from Arts SA. But this one isn't necessarily relying on any additional funding, bearing in mind that it's already 50% funded through the Places for People program from the state government through DIPTI.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Another question for staff as well. Throughout the document, it refers to both the concept design selection panel, as well as referring to our Arts and Cultural Advisory Group. Now, having been involved in this process before, I believe the Arts and Cultural Advisory Group is the selection panel, but this document doesn't make that clear. So it lists the concept design selection panel, but it doesn't actually articulate who that is.
Through the Mayor, I believe also the selection panel, they brought in other artists that weren't on the committee based on there was some conflicts of interest of artists who may have applied, but also to bring in any particular expertise they were looking for. So it could be different to the Arts and Cultural Advisory Committee as a selection panel, which would then go back via the Arts and Cultural Advisory Committee, then coming to Council. So I believe that's why it's not specifically articulated as the one and the same.
I guess, thank you for that. I think in future it would be good to have council knowing who the selection panel is. It would be ideal, rather than approving a selection panel that we're not sure who is on it. That would be my only comment in relation to that one, so thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything? Councillor Littley? You want to close the debate?
Yep, I will do, thank you. As far as the selection panel goes, and I heard Councillor Charles and others talking about the public consultation, and let's make sure we get the right thing that we want in this space as far as public art. I'm not much of an art critic, so it wouldn't be any good asking me. But, and my recall is that, well, this council wasn't here when the Main Street didn't endorse the Main Street artwork, this particular council. But we did with the Telstra building. So this council does have the final say on whether it endorses what's been chosen. So it is on us to get it right, and it would be on us to seek, I guess, advice from our constituents out there, the ratepayers, and bring those to the table when making that final endorsement. And if we're not satisfied that something that we think is going to be good for our community and good in this space has been put on the table, we don't have to choose it. So yeah, I'd like to, obviously I'll move this motion, and I'd like to see it progress. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just conscious that Councillor Glazebrook has had to leave us. Carla, would you just be able to see if he's all right, if he's able to join us?
I think, Mayor, he swallowed his drinking water the wrong way, so he's just coughing it up.
Yeah, I'd hate to go to the vote without him being able to vote if he wants to. So please bear with us for a minute.
Mayor Jenkins, I wonder whether this is an opportunity for maybe a short break. I know it's earlier than usual, but I guess whilst we're waiting, potentially.
I'm reluctant to have a break just before we go to a vote. I'd rather have the vote and then go to a short break afterwards. I don't think it's a cleaner cut. But no, it did cross my mind as well. No, that's right. Do you want a biscuit or something? Okay. We've finished the debate on that, Councillor Glazebrook, and so the recommendation 1 and 2 are now going to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Would you like to have a short break now, or carry on until 8 o'clock? Those who want a short break now? 1, 2. Those who want to carry on till 8 o'clock? Carry on till 8 o'clock? Okay. No, that's all right. We now come to item 12, which is corporate and customer services, and we have the review of the risk management policy. I'll do that recommendation en bloc, that Council receive and note the review, and that Council adopt the risk management policy as provided in attachment A. Moved by Councillor Charles and seconded by Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp, you'd like to?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. No, I think this has been good work in progress. I think it's something Council's been working on for a while, and it's not easy to write up a risk management policy and a risk management framework which will come out of this. So I think the staff through Karen has done a good job. I got good feedback on my comments, which is great to get good feedback. Whether they accepted or not accepted is not the issue. It's about understanding why it wasn't accepted, things like that. So it's quite good, and I do appreciate the effort taken there. I think it's a good policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I totally agree with what Councillor Kemp has just said. It's a good effort. I'd like to address, however, on page 147 at the bottom in the audit committee section down there, in what I think is some some really impossible language to expect the audit committee to safeguard the council's assets and to secure the accuracy and reliability of council records, because I think that what's intended in there is that, and I've got some words here to replace that with, to get rid of safeguard and secure, because I think it makes it impossible. That what we replace that with is to put in place put arrangements and systems in place to safeguard council assets and secure the storage of council records, because I think that I'm not sure if it's the accuracy and reliability of council records that's really being addressed here. I think it is the actual safekeeping of the council records. If I'm wrong on that, then happy to be corrected.
Kelly?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just in regards to that particular item at the bottom of page 147, those additional items such as storage and secure of records, the beginning sentence is around monitoring and reviewing that we have appropriate policies, procedures and internal controls that will then do all of those things. So they're the items that we are trying to cover off by having internal controls and policies and procedures. So whilst the audit committee may not be personally responsible for making sure that we have secure storage, what it is responsible for is making sure that we have adequate procedures and internal controls about access to those. So that's why that sentence is written that way. The very first two lines are the most important in terms of being responsible to monitor, review that appropriate policies, practices and procedures of internal control are implemented and maintained in order to assist the council to do all of those things. I hope that clarifies it just a little bit.
Yes, if I'm through the chair, if I might just come back to this issue of, okay, if it's safeguarding the council's assets, which I think this council does a very good job of, but anyway, that's not to make the audit committee responsible for safeguarding the council's assets, because that's the way I believe that the wording is put. But the last line, and to secure as far as possible the accuracy and reliability of council records. What are we trying to do there? My only thinking on that was that it meant keeping the council records in proper archive system, because otherwise how do you secure the accuracy and reliability of council records?
Yes, so through the Mayor, in terms of secure and accuracy of council records, it would be referring to our policies, procedures and internal controls around the use of those records and the integrity of those. So they may be electronic. It's about making sure that people have the right security access in order to look at particular records, and that they're amended or updated in line with our procedures and internal controls. Particularly, I guess, from a financial point of view as well, making sure that all of our financial transactions are accurate, that they have integrity, and that we've kept copies of all of those records so that we can provide evidence to auditors. So whilst the audit committee wouldn't be personally responsible for making sure they're physically secure, it would be around having those controls, internal controls written up in procedures that make sure that we as administration follow that through.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to recommendation 1 and 2? Can I just, that was moved on block by Councillor Charles and Kemp, wasn't it? Yep, that's right. That's right. Karina just checked with me and I thought it was, but I thought I'd better check. If there's no further discussion in relation to those recommendations, I'll put them to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to 13.1. I know that Councillor Mann has got an alternative motion that he would like to put forward. So I beg your pardon?
I'll move accepting the report first.
Yes,
I put
yep.
it. Thank you.
So we'll move, we'll go to recommendation 1, and then I'll ask Councillor Mann for his alternative motion in relation to the recommendation 2. So the first recommendation is that Council receive and note the Southern Fleurieu Regional Sport and Recreation Precinct Draft Feasibility Report, moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that report? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor. I was really surprised that that this document came, this report came to us here, because primarily it had a huge price tag on it, which was totally eye-popping compared to what we had assumed was going to be the sort of investment that was going to be made on this. And so, to me, it's a question really to the CEO, who I guess was, if not the first, then one of the first people to see this document. But was it immediately acceptable that the document should come forward with the sort of price tag that it did, or was there, to me, it would have been something that was really, if the original comparable projects had price tags that were big enough elephants to swallow, that that one would have been something that would have perhaps have gone back to the consultants rather than coming forward. But
yeah, Councillor Robertson, at the moment we're just talking about receiving and noting the report. The second recommendation and the recommendation that Councillor Mann is going to move does relate to the report being considered in terms of project costings, possible stagings, if anything, and takes that price tag into consideration. And I'm sure that will be talked about more at the next recommendation. This one is simply receiving the report and noting it.
I don't think so, Mayor. I mean, this is the council staff received and noted this report when it came to them some time ago. And to me, the question is now we're receiving and noting it. And to me, it has one, really major surprise. Well, probably more than a surprise, but to me, receiving and noting a report which has got a price tag on it, which is so far away from any expectation that was being delivered before, to me is one that was is a question. Why did we accept it as a report and not send it back?
You're not accepting the price tag or anything that's associated with it, Councillor Robertson. All you're doing is looking at the report, receiving the report, and then it can be discussed further in relation to whatever options the council wants to do. By receiving and noting the report, you're not agreeing to anything or agreeing it's not costing anything to receive it. I can ask the CEO why she wanted it presented at the council meeting, if that will help clarify it for you.
Through the Mayor, Councillor Robertson, the council resolved to undertake this feasibility study, and predominantly the consultants that were engaged have engaged with the working party and the broader consultation. So it has pretty much been a what would everyone like to have on this facility approach. And yes, it is a significant price tag, but it's not to say that I'm not to present it to the chamber. It's in a draft form. It's not the end product. It's not what council's expected to do, but this is what has pretty much come out of the consultation of everyone's needs, wants and expectations of what they would like on that facility. It's in draft. It hasn't gone back to that working group either. So as a result of the council resolution to engage or participate in a study, I need to bring it back without changing what the consultants have provided, so that council can then look to consider, well, look, you know, obviously the needs and wants of our community are much broader than we anticipated, but what are the next steps you then look to choose? So I wasn't the first to see the document. It went through the appropriate channels of the Department of E&I, but it's not for me to say, well, we can't present this to council because it's too big a figure. I need to present what was provided by the consultant. It is currently still only draft. That's why I presented it to the chamber as it is, without vetting it, culling it or changing it.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to say about receiving and noting the report? Not, I'll put it to the chamber. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Mann, you have an alternative motion you want to present?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. So I'll read that aloud. So my motion is that the report entitled Southern Fleurieu Regional Sport and Recreation Precinct Feasibility and Preliminary Design Project Draft Report be referred to a workshop of the City Activation and Strategic Planning Advisory Committee to consider the report, project costings and possible staging options. And I'll be looking for a seconder before I discuss it further.
Councillor Charles, you happy to second that?
Very happy to second that one.
Would you like to speak to your motion, Councillor Mann?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. So I take on the comments of Councillor Robertson, and I completely agree with them and the stance that you've said, and probably a lot of the other elected members here have also said. But I just want to, I guess, take you through this process of where this fits in the broader context. So I guess if we go back several years with this project of a new rec centre, we started off with this process of divergent thinking, of looking at where should the facility go, looking at all those options, and they went through the rigorous process and the costly process, and it was slowly narrowed down. And then finally in 2018, we got to the council voting for the Gillespie land option. Then we entered this second phase, which started shortly after, in determining what we want this new facility to be. So far, again, we got to go through that divergent thinking phase and look at what are all the options, what do the community want. And so this report that's been presented to us is everything the community could possibly want, not just the stakeholders, but the broader community, as many parts of the community as we can look to. That's what this report and what this budget entails. So by doing that, we're not missing anything in our scope. We're not getting a year or 2 years down the process and being like, someone suggests something and we think, why didn't we consider that? Or that might have been better than these other things. Through this process, we can look at, okay, what are all the things, identify them all, and then where we're up to now is that while I'm changing this recommendation, is that to go back to the committee, I don't think that would be, or the working party, would be a beneficial process, because we've got all their views, we've got all their opinions, we know what they want. And now what we've got is we've got the costings, we've got the demand, we know what the demand is currently for these different facilities and in the future. And we've got the fleshed out report about operational models and all the other different things associated with it. So what I'm recommending in terms of this working party and have a workshop is for all the elected members to come together at a CASPAC meeting, roll their sleeves up, sit down and look at, okay, here's our demand, this is the cost, do they balance? Is there a correlation between there? Or is this cost too outrageous and this demand too small to justify putting that in the facility? And I look forward to that process of joining all of you and going through and really working out what we want this facility to be for our community. And I'm sure, as Andrew said, and I'm sure my fellow elected members will agree that the price tag currently on there is ridiculous and outrageous, and because that's what it is. And I guess look at it through that lens that I've just set in terms of the process and where that sits in making sure we're identifying everything. So I look forward to working with you all and hopefully that you support this recommendation so we can really get down and get together in a CASPAC workshop and look at where we want it to go and how we can best serve our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I'll just ask Councillor Charles, as seconder, if he'd like to speak.
Yes, I would. And you might note my sleeves are already rolled up. And I do believe that there is a lot more to discuss. I've supported this motion because it brings us back to have a serious conversation about how, when and what. And I couldn't agree more. It certainly beats what was previously here on this page. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield, you wanted to speak, and then Councillor Glazebrook.
Yes, look, I will support this. I think it's absolutely fantastic that somebody is actually talking about being strategic, both within their thinking and planning. And thank you, Councillor Mann.
Councillor Glazebrook.
Just a question firstly, is this document, I did ask you earlier, but I didn't get an answer, CEO, is this document confidential? It's not marked confidential.
No, it's provided under separate cover. I did clarify for you after you asked for me, and asked Brian, it's not confidential. It's provided under separate cover because it's so big. So it's not confidential.
So none of those figures are confidential? Those,
no, they're draft cost estimates.
Okay. All right, well, I have to ask how on earth we got to this situation. How could we have proposed or considered a $45 million sporting complex? It's beyond reality in every aspect. We must have spent a considerable amount of money planning this, and it's wasted. Why go through that process? I don't understand. We have to consider and plan things that are viable, and to have this thing running at a deficit and $900,000 worth of depreciation a year is just not even worth thinking about. We've spent years after a facility that our community needs so desperately, and I've been so much in favour of, and now I'm devastated. And here we are back at the drawing board, really, as far as I'm concerned. I just wonder how we got here. But that's where I'm coming from.
I think, Councillor Glazebrook, to answer your question, it's the way that we got here was having this is the initial wish list, and absolutely this wish list is costing a huge amount of money. I think what Councillor Mann in his recommendation is suggesting that we bring this wish list to a workshop and we look at, well, what parts of it do we want, so that it doesn't cost us a huge amount of money that is there, but we work out what it is that the community wants and where that cost benefit lies. So as well as that, I think while it is not a confidential document, I would hate the document to go into the community and the community have the idea that this is the money that the council are going to be spending on the sporting complex, because that is absolutely not the case. The case is that this is the grand design, and we are going to be looking at what aspects of that grand design can we afford, do we want, and then take it from there. So I think it's really important that the right message goes out to the community in relation to this, because I think they would be in their right minds to be worried that we're going to be spending $40-odd million on something, whereas in fact we are not. Are there any further comments from the floor? Councillor Littley?
Yeah, I do have concerns about the perception that people will see that we're going to go out and spend an exorbitant amount of money on a project that my understanding and my read from what Councillor Mann has said is that that isn't the expectation out there, and it's the reality is, well, people are aware of the reality and are aware that this is a pie in the sky dream to get all of these things in. I do though appreciate the materials that have been brought together from this process and the opportunities, and there's other, we see all through our town other sporting precincts and other clubs working away at accommodating and getting better facilities as well. So out of this process and out of a workshop type event scenario, we might see those opportunities where we can transition people through and meet their expectations as well in other areas throughout our town and get an overall good outcome for everyone, not with that price tag. So it's it is a, I do agree that, well, I hope we haven't led people up the garden path to sit there and think that that this is the be all and end all and this is all going to happen. I don't think we have, but there are some benefits out of having a wish list like that as well, as frightening as that price tag is. So I will support this on the basis that we are looking to go to workshops and really start to sit down as a council, as a body of elected members, and take out the good parts of this, because there certainly are some good parts in this whole of report and the work that's been done.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Councillor Hales and then Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, echoing many of the expressed thoughts of fellow elected members in terms of when I picked up this document and read that initial figure, it was, okay, putting that down for a moment and walking away and coming back to it later, because it's a shocking number. But the process that produced that number was the fact that this council went, we need new rec facilities, and we had our rec community driving that council. Come on, we need more. Basketball's full, everything's full, like we need more. And so we set up a working party made up of the stakeholders, made up of the representatives of those groups, and they got together and absolutely they went, in a perfect world, we want this. And that is what has produced the result. We asked our community what they wanted and they told us. So to get upset at them for that is, I guess, unreasonable, I would say it's, as long as we're not selling it as, okay, we're going to do that now, that's the main issue there. But it's a great starting point for us. It's a great point to work, okay, communities had it say, the stakeholders have all gone, in a perfect world, we would have this. If we were in the middle of the city, we would have this. And now we have to come in, we have to workshop it as a council going, well, the rec centre doesn't kind of exist in isolation. It exists as part of a community and we have limitations on size and budgets and all these things. And therefore it's our job as the representatives of the wider community, not just the sporting groups, to go, that's the dream. This is kind of more achievable and work it towards that. So I think what Councillor Mann has suggested here is the right way of approaching it. We often get criticised for council coming out with an idea and putting it out there and then going, what is this? You haven't consulted anyone. Well, this is the opposite way around. So we may be a bit shocked by it, but like the community does, we work way back to that middle ground, find where's the acceptable line, and hopefully down the track, 5-10 years time, we'll see an awesome facility that our community can use and play sport in, and that we can accommodate all those people who are living in our community currently, but also moving into our community, growing up in our community. It's an investment in our future, in our health, in all sorts of things. So I really look forward to the process of, I guess, bringing what is a big picture idea back down into something that we can actually achieve for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Robinson.
Yes, Mayor. I totally agree that that this facility is what we need here. One of my main reasons is that if we are to attract in Victor Harbour new businesses, and particularly those people in the age range 30 to 45 that are going to be the ones that will really drive developments in this community, then such a facility like this would be front and centre in terms of the attractions of them coming to Victor Harbour, notwithstanding some of the other well-touted features of this city, like its natural beauty, etc. There are 2 or 3 things, however, that I think are missing out of this this report. And that is that if you delve into the back of it, and I've read the whole thing, you know, there are so many costs that are still not included in this eye-popping amount here. And some of them allude to some of the deficiencies in this process here. As I've mentioned before, I'm very keen on having all of our future investments to be, if possible, carbon neutral and energy positive. This is things we can actually do to make it happen. It is not mentioned anywhere in this document that it will be any one of either of those two aspects. In fact, it talks in here about some of the things that the costing does not include, which is standby generators. Well, hang on, guys. If you were making this energy positive, you wouldn't be talking about standby generators, you'd be talking about batteries. But there's no mention of any solar or wind power arrangements for this whole development. Secondly, I think it's being set up by an Adelaide firm for Adelaide contractors. And I think that one of the things we really have got to home in on is that when we put up the development of a facility like this, that we should, wherever we can, think about not just the energy positive side of the development, but put in place ones where can we construct this with local firms? Not something that requires, you know, a multitude of Adelaide firms to come down here and fix it up, and to put it up, but can we do this with local expertise? And I think the way that it's being set up here is one that's suited for the Adelaide or interstate contractors, and we know where that leads in terms of the crumbs that fall to local businesses down here. So to me, there are two or three. The other part that's missing out of this is that this is a sports and recreation centre. So but it's basically all talking about sports, the team sports, the ball sports, the netball, the basketball, the squash, the whatever. There are a few other there's a recreational mention in there of rock wall climbing, but some of the other, and there's mentions on the maps there of, you know, bringing into this facility, tying into this, getting value added from it, of all the trail networks that we're developing here. But it hardly gets a mention in this document because it's all focused on team ball sports and athletics. It doesn't consider the you know, walking, cycling, horse riding, any of those connections into this facility. And also what it doesn't mention, we've got in there the dragon boat races. I'm not quite sure, it doesn't describe how they get a ticket, a Guernsey to the skin in the game, but anyway, I can imagine maybe as a training facility for them or something. But you know, not far away you have mud and tars. It's not even mentioned. It's a major recreational activity for us here in Victor. And to me, the other part that's not mentioned, and it barely gets a mention, is funding sources. What about the private sector investment in this? To me, it comes down to something like, would there be an interest in private sector interest in co-financing this facility if, say, for instance, it had accommodation, if there was a hotel attached to it?
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Your time's up.
So can I ask for 1 minute?
With the leave of the meeting,
if not,
you can...
don't worry, I've said enough. Don't worry about it. I won't fret over it.
Councillor Charles?
Yeah, I have to leave this meeting. I've got an emergency at a nursing home,
Okay.
nurses station.
Unless anybody else wants to say anything, we might be voting. If you've got 1 minute.
Yes, I'll take them.
Councillor Mann, do you want to close? Oh, sorry, no. No. Councillor Kemp wants to speak and then Councillor Mann will close.
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. Look, I'll support this motion. I think it's a great idea, concept that we need to be having a workshop to really break this down and to get to within our budget what we would want to spend. But also, I think we shouldn't limit ourselves to the last couple of points there about our scoping. I think we should have a very broad scope in this discussion. I want to see that expanded out because it's all about how it fits in the community plan over 10 years or our asset management plan. All those need to be included, not just focused on the report and try and break that down. I think it's a bigger holistic view on about how we want this centre. We do want it, but now we have a start point, as the other councillors have said. I think it's just an opportunity to take into account everything else that fits with it. And that may even be a concept of location. because it may not be the best fit because it's within close proximity of an inland river, and of course there's the floodplain issues, and that is a big issue. So we don't want to have to go down that pathway again because it's very close. So I guess again it's either the Encounter Bay precinct or the Gillespie land, but I know there's a motion put forward to look at the Gillespie land. But again, I think that's part of the discussion to have that again around how that concept will work, because we want to build it, but we want to build the right one for the right price.
Councillor Mann, do you want to close the
I'll
debate?
just quickly finish that. Just some concluding remarks. I completely understand and appreciate all the comments that have been said around the table. And I guess in just addressing Councillor Glazebrook's concerns, and I very much appreciate those concerns and where that's coming from. I just echo what Councillor Hayward very elegantly said. This was the process of all we did was go out to community consultation, ask the community, what do you want? And then they told us, and that's as simple as it is. And they said, oh, councils are asking, we'll tell them everything we want. And I know that's a ridiculous figure and looking at that, but I think we've been so focused on community consultation and we discussed it with the arts. And I think we really want to ensure we are doing that. So I think this process has been successful in that way. And I guess just to touch on Councillor Robertson's points, very much like your point about the carbon neutrality. I think great point. Make sure, I guess you mentioned that when we have these workshops and all those points, bring them up again, because I think that they're excellent to the discussion, such as the design, ensuring that the design can be constructed locally, and whether looking at that in balancing those costs as well. I think that's also a great point as well. And just with the Dragon boats, it's more concerned with storage for their boats, not putting in a river or anything like that. So yeah, that would blow out the cost a bit more. But yeah, that's just my concluding remarks, and I thank you all for your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I'll put that recommendation to the floor now. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't realise I had my phone on.
Oh.
But this is, I'll be back, but I don't know when I'll be back. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. We now go to item 13.2, the corner of Wattle Drive and Hindmarsh Road encroachment. I'm just wondering whether or not we could do that on block.
I'd support that on block.
You'd support that on block? Thank you, Councillor Robinson, and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Robinson? Councillor Henderson? Anybody want to speak to it? If not, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now come to minutes of council committee meetings, and the first one is the Fleurieu Region Community Services Advisory Committee, and the recommendation, which I will do on block as well. I'll take as read, moved by Councillor Littley and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robinson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have 3 points, but one question and 2 comments. The question is, I noticed that Councillor Schofield was moving moving motions on the, I think it was the 26th of June or 25th of May meeting, but she wasn't minuted on the 12th of May as being present at the meeting. Perhaps, and I guess she was there, but not in the present group. That was my question. Was she there?
Yes, I was there, and I think it was actually raised that I hadn't been included. But I was there.
Thank you very much. We'll amend those minutes. Councillor Robertson, thank you for
more importantly, on page 168, I see excellent there in the business arising that on the 10th of September, that the families, support for families and children is developing a collective impact plan. And I think this is excellent. This is precisely the way, this kind of methodology that we need, and particularly in community services where we have been in the past developing very much 4 or 5 streams of activity. We're not realising any of the economies of scale or any of the add-on benefits of being able to have a methodology like collective impact to be able to do it. But I was just wondering out of that, but it would be much more effective if that collective impact was developed across the whole of community services. So that comes back to a question I would ask for the CEO of how are we going in relation to the recruitment of the new manager for this group, but also is there any intention of including collective impact as being a default approach to the development of the community services?
Graham?
Sorry, just trying to work out who's going to say what, but sorry, through the Mayor. Yeah, with regard to the position, we have an acting manager in the position at the moment. We've decided to extend that out for another 6 months till the end of the year to enable some time for some service review work to occur in that space, particularly given the changes regionally with Alexandrina withdrawing from services and things like that. So there's a bit of work we need to do with service review in the first instance, and then we can look to recruiting a permanent manager.
And just to add to that, part of that review is about the broader impacts of the collective impact, and we wanted to look at the appropriate skills and qualifications we wanted to bring into that position, and it makes sense to actually undertake the review of those services together with Council about what we're wanting to deliver, and then recruit the appropriate person into that role for the longer term.
Thank you, CEO. Then the last comment I have is on the page 180 at the bottom of the new draft Memorandum of Understanding. The third bullet point there talks about an expectation that this funding agreement, which is now just between Yankalilla and Victor Harbor since the pull out of the Alexandrina Council from this arrangement, that it says here that if a council wishes to withdraw from the regional program, then the council should give reasonable notice, taking into account the term of any funding agreement. I think that is, given the extreme disruption, the huge cost that Alexandrina's precipitous action in terms of pulling out of this community service arrangement, that's sticking in there a wishy-washy, give them a reasonable notice, that can mean anything. But I think what that should be replaced with, that at least a budget year's notice should be given in case a council, now there's only Yankalilla Council is in it, but at least that should be a year notice.
I'm happy to make those amendments. I think it's fair and reasonable in terms of at least within a budget cycle.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. More of a question. The current grant funding, when does that cease? And of course, when do you go back for more grant funding to maintain and continue these community services for the next X years? So just that timelines for that. The first question, please.
I will have to take that question on notice. There's varying different times for different agreements. It's not one agreement. So I'd need to take that question on notice and get back to you, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, CEO. The other one is that because Alexandrina's pulled out, and for the 2021 budget, because we got grant funding in place, that's why we continue it, and we are fulfilling the gap in what Alexandrina's not funding. Are we only servicing our community in Yankalita community, or are we servicing the whole Fleurieu as part of the grant funding?
We're continued to service all our existing clients, whether they be Alexandrina or Victor Harbour, but we're not taking on any new clients, is my understanding, for from Alexandrina.
So in the context of that, CEO, once the grant funding finishes for this process, then would we then still include those clients in the new grant funding and new provisions, or the review process that will go through to look at what we want to deliver may then change that?
The review process will address that, and also what other future grants we look to then auspice and deliver the services we deliver.
That's all, Councillor Kemp.
Questions, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to say? If not, I'll put those 3 recommendations en bloc to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. It is 8 o'clock, so if people would like to have a 10-minute break, I'm getting some nods, some chairs going out, another nod. So I think we've got, can we have a show of hands? Just, yep, beautiful. And so if you'd like to come back at 8:10, we'll continue then. Thank you very much. please. Okay, beautiful. We're now up to 14.2, which is the CEO Performance Review Committee minutes of the 28th of May. Would someone like to move the recommendation that we receive and note the minutes? Councillor Schofield, thank you, and Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to them? Does anyone want to speak to them? In that case, then I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you very much. 15.1, the representative reports, and the recommendations that Council receive and note the representative reports. Moved by Councillor Hales and seconded by Councillor Mann. All those in, or any questions about the representative reports? Councillor Kemp.
I just want to make a statement. It may not be well known, but the FRAC authority has lost its executive officer. It's unfortunate that Deb Palmer has decided to move on, and her last day is the 10th of July. So my question would be to the CEO, in consultation with Alexandrina Council, is any support to the authority coming in the way of an exec officer until we get that person replaced? Is any support coming? Thank you.
Through the Mayor, I have had an initial discussion with your new chair, Steve Matheson. Initially, I haven't had a discussion with Alexandrina Council. We're yet to have that discussion between us. He contacted us both directly to talk about that and pose that exact question. So we need to have a conversation about what resourcings we do have between us.
Any further questions? Put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. (16.1) is the mayoral report. The recommendations that Council receive and note that. Councillor Hales, thank you, and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about that? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The elected member reports for June. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Hales, thank you, and Councillor Schofield seconding that. Any questions about any of the elected member reports? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We have 18.1 questions on notice, and that's just for noting and information in relation to Mr. Blatchford, the Crozier Hill Estate. Oh, I beg your pardon. We missed out on matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency. Questions on notice, that's just for reporting and noting. 18.1, Crozier Hill Estate. And 18.2, questions on notice, the hydrographic survey map, Crozier Hill Estate. 18.2, just for noting as well. We go to motions on notice. Questions without notice? Are there any questions without notice? No. We now go to motions on notice, and the first recommendation is that Council receive and note the motion on notice, installation of fire safety requirements to the NRMA Victor Harbour Beachfront Holiday Park. Councillor Kemp's report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you very much. And seconded by Councillor Mann. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting that report? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. Councillor Kemp, would you like to propose your motion?
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. My motion is that the City of Victor Harbour, as owners of the Victor Harbour Beachfront Holiday Park, endorses a sum of $1 million and any additional funds, if required, in the Capital 2021 budget to make rectification works to the fire safety systems by the 30th of October 2020, in accordance with the requirements of the Ministerial Building Standard SA 003 Fire Safety in Caravan Parks and Residential Parks 2019, to protect life and property from fire and the effects of fire, and to close sections of the caravan park which are not compliant with the relevant standard. The reason why I put this motion up is because, even though it's a complex problem, but it's also a simple solution. The issue around is public safety, and when you have a council ownership of a public area where the public can go to, we need to be seen as leaders and showing the way in the way of having those parks safe for our people to visit and stay. There are 3 parks in the CBD of Victor Harbour, and the Beachfront Caravan Park, the one we own, Victor Harbour Holiday Cabin Park, and the Adair Camp and Caravan Park. Those 2 parks have standards of fire safety systems in comparison to the Beachfront Caravan Park that doesn't. So there is a difference between a private-owned caravan parks with the upgraded fire safety systems as required by the ministerial standard, but the council one is not. The issues around having this in place is that in the commentary by the administration, which is quite good and honest, that the fact that, you know, ministerial building standard of SA 003 and residential parks and other building codes and standards is not retrospect. That's true, it's not. So we can't apply that standard, but it's the only one we've got at the moment to actually bring up the parks fire safety systems. But during the years of 2015 to 2019, there was up to 15 development applications which were approved for the Beachfront Caravan Park. For the triggers, and what are the triggers to actually upgrade your fire safety systems? It's development applications with approvals, whether it's modification or an upgrade. There was 15 times that has happened over 4 years and it was never enacted. Now, ministerial SA 003 wasn't in place, but what was in place for that to happen was the Minister's Specification SA 76A, December 2007, which was upgraded to the new ministerial standard. So the trigger would have been for the council, once those applications came in for a modification or upgrade, is to look at that Minister's Specification and realise that they're required to follow that specification to upgrade the fire safety systems. It hasn't been done. Due to public safety, and I think it's important that we get this done in this environment at the moment where it's low period, it's winter, before the summer season comes, because if everyone comes down here for summer, like everyone's predicted, we want our park to be safe. We've got to be careful and mindful that as a leader in our community, and councils are that, you know, to set the standards of what we need to have in place. So I think through the process here is that we do need to upgrade the system. I understand the commentary from the administration is that they're going back to the Building Fire Safety Committee. And that's fair enough too, but the Building Fire Safety Committee has already written to Council. Back in November, the CO received a report stating you must have upgraded fire safety systems. So I don't understand why we need to go back again when we've already got that in place, even though I guess the owner of a park like this or a building can come back with a different system for the building fire safety to look at. So I guess that's the process going there. But in the meantime, time has been moving on for years and this park's been undervalued in the way of fire safety. I think to get this in place and stop procrastinating in making decisions, I think my motion is to get this happening now. So we ensure that time the summer season comes, we have a fire safety system in place that gives protection to the occupants of that park. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Did someone, who seconded? Oh no, have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Robinson? Do you want to speak to that? You wanted to speak, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, according to the information provided, the background information provided by our administration, I believe this matter is already well in hand by administration and our Fire Safety Committee. So I don't see the relevance of this motion at all.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I wonder whether or not Brian Doman, who's here, would be able to provide some background in terms of what the Fire Safety Committee and inspectors are doing.
Yes, through the Mayor. So that draft report from Florian has gone to the Building Fire Safety Committee. Unfortunately, it missed their meeting on Thursday, but they are looking at it out of meeting at the moment. So
Can you, when you say the draft report, can you expand on that?
yeah, so the draft report has a series of options that will bring the caravan park up to compliance. I think that's probably reasonable. It's really then for the Building Fire Safety Committee to look at those options. It might be a combination of some of those options, but to bring that back and we can move on from there.
Thank you. And the Fire Safety Committee, are they they're professionals in that area?
Yes, they are. They're from, correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, but MFS and yeah.
So perhaps Graham Pathouse?
Sure, through the Mayor. The qualifications for the Building Fire Safety Committee are building surveying and fire engineering qualifications. They're prescribed, the qualifications required are prescribed by the regulations. Council only in recent months appointed the members to it. So it has 3 members that are qualified in those areas around building surveying and building certification and the application of fire standards, if you like. And the others are Metro Fire Service and the CFS, sorry. Yeah, the CFS, Country Fire Service. So there's a representative from each one of those as well.
How recently did they undertake a inspection of the caravan park?
I'm not sure when the inspection was. I would assume it was late last year because the initial letter to council was in November. So since that time, there's been some work that the property team have put together in terms of engaging a fire engineering expert to provide solutions or options, as Brian's described them, to meet and satisfy the intent of the standard. So, and as Brian's mentioned, that's now gone to the committee, albeit that it didn't quite make it on the agenda on Thursday, but it has been distributed to all members so they can deal with it out of session. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a comment with a question on the end. I appreciate, I guess, what Councillor Kemp's putting up here, especially with his background and his knowledge in the industry and around these matters. I just note in the report though, and sort of where my question is, if I'm correct in this. So the Florian Fire Consulting has prepared this report, which has gone to the Fire Safety Committee. They're assessing that out of their normal meeting at the moment. And then they'll guide us on an outcome. But also I note that it says, for the purpose of the 2020-2021 budget, a project bid and allowance has already been put forward by administration in support of these outcomes. So I guess what I'm asking is whether we go with waiting for this report and then following those outcomes in our budget, or whether we allocate the money in the budget now. It doesn't really speed up the process either way. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor. So in answer to your question, the provision that's been made is in the sum of around $56,000, which is one of the options that's been recommended by the consultants, which we're going back to the Building Fire Safety Committee to see if it does meet all the requirements. Councillor Kemp's recommendation is $1 million, which is as if we were building a new park, what would be required. If we were to build a new park, we would need to meet all of the standards, or if we were making any significant modifications. So the audit that was done by the Building Fire Safety Committee last year made a number of recommendations that were required to be implemented by the caravan park tenant in regards to their responsibilities, and there were also a series of responsibilities that are required by Council as the landlord of the facility. It's those requirements that we then sought engineering advice, and again looking at the best solution. So we are aware that we need to make some provisions to bring it up to standard. It's whether you want the full provisions of a new facility, or those that will bring a existing facility up to standard and meet the requirements. That's what we're seeking the advice back from the Building Fire Safety Committee. So the difference being is there is currently provision in the budget for one of those options, not the $1 million option.
Councillor Robinson, I'll let you speak, but as somebody who seconded this motion, you really need to speak at the time when I ask the mover or the seconder if they want to speak. But I will let you speak this time, but just keep that in mind for next time.
Yeah, I had it in mind, Mayor, but there's been some comments come up that I feel that I have to make a response to. Firstly, I think in relation to Councillor Henderson's remarks that it's not sidelining any of the Building Fire Safety Committee or any of the others. This is, as the CEO alluded to, this is a choice between bringing this caravan park up to standard, whether you're prepared to do it in bits and pieces over an indeterminate number of years, like for instance, put $55,000, which is water tanks, which doesn't really address the issue of providing hose and reel attachments, which would be the full-on standard, or whether you want to say, right, we just need to, it's a public safety issue, we just need to do it, so let's do it now. So it's not ignoring or sidelining any of Council's own decision-making structures. Building Fire Safety Committee has already made the recommendation that the facilities need to be improved. This is a choice you as a council are going to make between whether you want to get it done and dusted, bring it all up to speed, or whether you're prepared to carry the risk that if something goes wrong, you had the chance, but you decided to do it piecemeal. Thank you.
Councillor Littley.
I'm not going to support this motion. I think, and Councillor Robertson just gave me some insight into, some more insight into why I won't. We need to ask the question, is the work that our Fire Safety Committee and the planned work that's happening through the administration and through the going processes going to make this park, our facility, compliant? The answer that I'm hearing is yes. It will be brought up to compliance. It won't be non-compliant. It'd be great to have $1 million spend, get it out the way, everything in place new. But what this also does as a piecemeal approach or as an ongoing approach is it takes us back to this site each time and time, and it keeps us looking at the evolving issues, whether there are evolving issues. We're able to keep looking at it and make sure that this is compliant going well into the future. And it's not a massive outlay, it's an ongoing outlay, and it's an ongoing commitment to keep this compliant and safe and people safe. If this is going to be compliant, at the end of the day, once we've done the work that the administration and our fire safety, our experts who are engaged by us to actually look over our facilities and keep them compliant, if it's going to be compliant, the process is working. So I'm not going to support this motion. I support the work that is already being undertaken.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Not. Councillor Kemp, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just to clarify a few issues, the audit of the caravan park was April 3rd, 2019. 12 months when they did it. They did the report in June. It went to the management of the park, didn't get to council where it's supposed to go. Now, if the Building Fire Safety Committee doesn't know who owns the park and where to send the reports to, because that's where the reports have to go to the owners. So you start to question in some issues around why did it not go to the owners of the park. You talk about professionalism and things like that, and yes, I've met those people. I had a meeting with them, and they are very professional and they're very qualified. The point is about the ministerial standards is that it doesn't talk about significant. It talks about new, it doesn't talk about significant upgrades, it talks about upgrades or modified. under the rules around this type of development is that we had 15 development applications which were approved in 4 years, and that's the trigger as a modification, as an upgrade. That's where you look at your fire safety system to upgrade it. All this motion is about is ensuring that money is allocated in the budget to cover off on the facilities if it requires $1 million. If we don't spend $1 million, we only spend 400,000, you don't spend $1 million. You only spend the money it costs to do it. So the actual requirements of this, because of procrastination over the last 12 months of this nothing happening, this is why this motion is put here, to make something happen. Now, there's no guarantees that what the Building Fire Safety Committee will come back with is that it's going to meet the requirements. Now, they may come back with a minimum, but it's going about how we apply it. If they come back and say you need hose drills, then put hose drills in. That's their recommendation already, is put hose drills in, not 2 water tanks. That does nothing for protection around the park. There's 1.6 kilometres of roadworks. That's why it costs so much money to put hose drills in, because you've got to put fire mains through, and one hose drill put two sites. So this is about getting action now for public safety. And at the moment, why we still have that park open, people are vulnerable against the effect of a fire, or a fire happens, or their property. So from a risk management point of view, you look at the risks that put in there, look at the risk management point of view of the aspects of if someone died in there and their facilities weren't available, then how would that look for council? The only caravan park in the town has no fire cover. So this is why this motion is here, to get it happening now. If the Building Fire Safety Committee comes back with their recommendations, we've got the money already allocated. We don't have to bring it back into council. If there were 6 options already up from the consultant, why were we only given 1 as part of the budget bid? Doing it in a piecemeal approach, you know, is still going to make it's going to minimise the risk over time. We'll still have a risk there. It will be high. So again, I think we're playing around with public safety. We don't commit to an action, and this action is to have it completed by 30th of October. And that's what we need to be doing if we want to be serious about public safety in one of our owned, council-owned facilities. Look at the risk management, look at the risks involved, and look what happens if something goes wrong. As for the budget, well, there's plenty of money in the budget where we can move things around, make decisions on priorities, and take money out, reduce stuff to put stuff in. So that's not an issue about funding. It's really about getting it done now while we can. And all of the Building Fire Safety Committee recommendations may be complement. But why set for the minimum? Why not go for the cream of what we should provide to make our park even better and even so, and actually be a leader in this and show the community this is what we'll do to look after our people and the visitors who come here. Thank you.
I'll put that motion to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Certainly, Councillor Robertson has called for a division. All those in favour? Just wait for Karina to catch up. For Councillor Kemp, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Charles. Against, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Littley, Councillor Glazebrook, Councillor Schofield, Councillor Mann, and Councillor Hales. That motion has been lost. We now move to item 21, motions without notice. Are there any motions without notice? No. We move now to 22, which is the confidential items, the first of the confidential items. And the first recommendation is that pursuant to section 92 of the Local Government Act 1999, the council orders that all members of the public, except for the Chief Executive Officer, Victoria McCurdy, Director Community and Development, Graham Pathouse, Director Corporate and Customer Services, Karen Rotuszynski, Director Environment and Infrastructure, Glenn Sanford, that's actually Acting Brian Doman, Group Manager, Governance and Finance, Kelly Knight-Stacey, and Executive Assistant, Karina Overall, be excluded from attendance at the meeting for agenda item 22.1, confidential, Fleurieu Regional Aquatic Centre Authority, appointment of member to Audit and Risk Management Committee 2020. Council is satisfied that pursuant to section 93 of the Act, the information to be received, discussed or considered in relation to this agenda item is information the disclosure of which would involve the unreasonable disclosure of information concerning the personal affairs of any person, living or dead, being the selection of independent board chair and member for the Fleurieu Regional Aquatic Centre. A number of matters are likely to be raised and discussed that relate to the personal affairs of the individual applicants. The council is satisfied that the principles that the meeting be conducted in a place open to the public have been outweighed in these circumstances as the matters are deemed not to be in the public interest. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And seconded by Councillor Schofield. Thank you very much. Do either of you want to say anything? Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Glazebrook.
I'll just ask a question really as to why this needs to go into confidence. Is it normal practice that a appointment to an audit committee would be in confidence? I really can't see any point.
It was considered in confidence by the FRACA authority. Obviously, it's referring to an individual person, so that's why is whether that debate is ensued, and it's still in confidence with the FRACA board. No, it has been lifted. Look, Karen's shaking her head at me.
Sorry, through the chair, this particular item wasn't heard in confidence by the FRACA authority, but traditionally these items have been put to council in confidence, largely to do with the debate in case there's conversation or debate, particularly about the personal affairs of the applicant, whereas at the time in the FRACA authority board meeting, there was a call for nominations and there was less likelihood of being a debate about the individual that was put forward as the nominee. I hope that clarifies sufficiently.
Doesn't need to be in confidence.
It can be brought out of confidence straight away. It was mostly for the fact that the debate might be talking about the individual affairs or the affairs of that individual. Immediately we can bring the resolutions out of confidence.
Yep, okay. Did everybody get that? We can bring the resolution out of confidence immediately afterwards. It's just the first recommendation is to go into confidence in case there's questions that people have in relation to the personal affairs of the person that we're talking about. So I'll put the motion to the floor. All those in favour? 6. And those against? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. We'll just wait for the gallery to leave. Thank you very much, gallery. We'll call you back in afterwards.